Welcome, everybody. This is the UCSF Osher Center for Integrative Health monthly research seminar. My name is Ariana Thompson-Lastad. I'm one of the research faculty here, and I coordinate this series with my colleague, Jen Felder. And today we are going to be hearing a talk by Dr. Chanda Williams, who's a postdoc fellow here at the Osher Center. And her talk is titled Serving Life, Formative Research Exploring the Benefits of Yoga for Incarcerated Populations. Dr. Williams has a degree in somatic depth psychology, as well as additional degrees in mechanical engineering and integrative health. And her research is focused on integrative health and health disparities. She collaborates with UCSF faculty on a few different research projects, aside from the one she'll be talking about today, including research that we do together about midwifery care and postpartum health, and projects about uptake and acceptability of integrative oncology practices among Black people with cancer. Chanda is a longtime yoga practitioner, yoga teacher, trainer, and therapist, and works to support the complex healing journey for people who've experienced trauma with care, compassion, and understanding. She spent over 10 years teaching trauma-informed mindfulness-based yoga practice to incarcerated people in jails and prisons in California, including San Quentin, and is dedicated to increasing access to body-mind practices to overcome trauma, improve mental health, and cultivate a sense of greater well-being. So welcome, Dr. Williams. We're so glad you're giving this talk. And for everyone who's here, thank you, person who's telling me about my mic. I'll try to be closer. For everyone who is here in the audience, we will have the last 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. Feel free to put questions along the way in the chat that will be answered at the end, or just hold your questions and you can ask them out loud towards the end. Okay, go ahead, Chanda, when you're ready.
Erica, can you give me screen sharing permissions, please? Thank you. There we go. Perfect.
Are you able to share now?
I am. Thank you.
Good.
So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for attending today's research seminar based on my dissertation research. I just want to give you a heads up that the majority of the photos in this presentation were taken by Robert Sturman and are not participants in this study. In this presentation, I will review my research, providing background for the study and aspects of the literature review. I'll also describe the research design as well as unique considerations for this population. Lastly, I will present the findings, recommendations, and implications for practice and policy. And as Ariana stated, there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. As a researcher, I acknowledge that I am part of the research process and that my prior experiences and beliefs impact it. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and witnessed and was exposed to the harms of interpersonal and structural violence from a young age. And although both of my parents suffered from alcohol use disorder, my family stressed the importance of education as a pathway to a better life. I experienced loved ones who were impacted by oppression, addiction, and incarceration, although this was never really discussed openly. Outwardly, while I was attaining the markers of success, inwardly, I was a bundle of stress, anxiety, and hypervigilance. It was a mentor when I was an undergrad who suggested that I try yoga, and I admit that I was skeptical but curious. Needless to say, that first class not only won me over, but radically altered the course of my life. I practice and study yoga, and as Ariana stated, became a yoga teacher, and I practice as a yoga therapist, and I pursued a PhD in this field. In 2008, I volunteered to teach yoga and meditation in the San Francisco County Jail as part of a program that was sponsored by the Sheriff's Office. Most of those participants in the program had committed an act of violence against an intimate partner and received a court mandate to engage in this particular program as part of their sentence. Although I had had family members incarcerated, I had never been inside a correctional facility before, volunteering for this program. My first memory of going into that class is seared into my body. The doors are heavy, they're jarring and clangorous. There's buzzing alarms, people yelling. The crackle of the PA system as instructions are yelled out, the jangle of the guards' keys as they passed in the corridors. And I recall thinking to myself, how could a place like this help someone rehabilitate? Since that time, I have regularly taught yoga in county jails and prisons within California, and I worked to educate myself on incarceration in the United States, as well as wanting to understand best practices for teaching yoga to people with trauma. I witnessed many people exhibiting visible signs of physical harm, substance abuse, and mental illness entering my classes. And I had a glimpse into the system of mass incarceration and its impact on people. And I also saw the opportunity to serve life, offering hope, supporting personal as well as collective liberation. Dr. Angela Davis wrote, "All over the world, the institution of prison serves as a place to warehouse people who represent major social problems. Prison serves as an institution that consolidates the state's inability and refusal to address the most pressing social problems of this era," unquote. The social problems that Dr. Davis refers to are numerous, and it's important to address them through comprehensive approaches that focus on rehabilitation, access to resources, improved health, and creating opportunities for individuals to reintegrate into society successfully. The problem of mass incarceration is rooted in systemic racism and social inequality, exacerbating the effects of violence, as well as self-harm and suicide. The United States has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world, with about 1.9 million people, making the United States the categorical leader among large industrialized nations. The US also ranks the highest in recidivism rates, with recent research findings averaging a 70% rate within 3 years post-release. Given the fact that nearly everyone who goes to jail and approximately 95% of people who are in state or federal prison will eventually return home, prison rehabilitation programs have a direct impact on their reentry. But less than 1%, I'll say that again, less than 1% of the CDCR's, that's the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation's budget, goes towards rehabilitation or programming designed to bridge a life in prison custody to a life in reentry into our communities. As of 2020, corrections account for almost 9% of California's general funds, or $14 billion. At the heart of mass incarceration are the systemic oppression of Black, Indigenous, people of color, the LGBTQIA+ community, and poor people. For example, Black people make up roughly 38% of the incarcerated population, despite representing only 12% of the people who live in the United States. There are many factors that contribute to an individual's likelihood of engaging in violent behavior and becoming incarcerated. One such factor is trauma. According to several studies in the United States, approximately 1 in 6 men who are incarcerated in state prisons reported being subjected to physical or sexual abuse before reaching the age of 18, with many more men who witnessed interpersonal violence during their childhood. Over half of those individuals reported experiencing childhood physical trauma, which, along with violent trauma and multiple trauma exposures, is a risk factor for PTSD. There is extensive evidence regarding yoga for mental health, as well as treatment for PTSD in a variety of populations, including veterans, victims of sexual assault, and domestic violence, among others. In examining the literature, I delved into the research, really looking deeply into 3 different territories. In looking at published research in incarceration, it became clear that there were significant social disparities in terms of who was in prison, and that many of the people who were incarcerated had had a history of trauma, mental illness, and substance abuse. And particularly with substance abuse, we need to be mindful of the fact that from the Reagan era forward, addiction became criminalized, as well as a way of continuing a pattern of social control and slave labor, only this time through the prison system. Extensive research has indicated that trauma is a significant mental health issue in the lives of incarcerated people and could be essential to conceptualizing interventions that can improve the safety of correctional officers, staff, and incarcerated people while improving their mental health and reentry outcomes. I selected categories for the literature review that orient the reader by providing background and reflecting on the need for this research. Neuroscience and the mind-body connection facilitated a discussion of emerging research and findings highlighting how the specific modality proposed in my research impacts the traumatic brain. And lastly, yoga therapy describes treating trauma with mindfulness-based trauma-informed yoga, as well as introduces the framework that this particular program, the Prison Yoga Project, provides to participants. My study explored the following question: what are the perceived long-term benefits of participation in trauma-informed mindfulness-based yoga classes? I focused this research on the relevance and potential of contemporary manifestations of yoga in the United States, particularly emphasizing the liberatory aspects of yoga for marginalized groups, and sought to investigate the long-term benefits of participation in trauma-informed mindfulness-based yoga for incarcerated populations. I obtained approval for my dissertation proposal during the summer of 2020, and we can all imagine how many things had to pivot as a result of the pandemic. My original research design included a pre-post-test quasi-experiment using a control group to examine the impact of yoga on interoceptive awareness, dispositional mindfulness, and the psychological well-being in incarcerated men. Federal and state governments implemented quarantine and lockdown measures, and many jails and prisons, including San Quentin, were closed to non-staff. Due to the pandemic's toll, it highlighted the need for enhanced resources to support individuals' reentry into our communities. So my proposal underwent a major modification as a post hoc study, recognizing that formerly incarcerated people faced several barriers upon release, and yoga represented one possible approach to mitigate them. I collected qualitative data to recognize that one must allow for many voices when seeking knowledge. A phenomenological design honored the participants' lived experiences, allowing them agency to speak into the research and inform the results. And it's important that I honor and acknowledge my contribution to this work and the fact that my research focus and wanting to make sure that I ensure that the research is culturally appropriate, respectful, and compassionate towards these communities. This research is anti-colonial, anti-racist, and feminist in its approach. As part of my feminist praxis, I located myself concerning this research. I am an African-American, middle-class, college-educated, cisgender woman. Whenever I enter a jail or prison to teach yoga, I am disheartened by the sea of Black and brown faces. I am also deeply committed to my research topic because far too many of those incarcerated due to systemic racism at every stage of the criminal legal system look like me. I join all abolitionists and freedom fighters to end mass incarceration and the wounds of 400 years of oppression. This study hopes to inspire the use of a unique perspective in research that ultimately addresses our society's pressing issues, recognizing its ability to contribute to the body of literature and recognizing the importance of this work for incarcerated individuals in particular. My work is in service to life. Incarcerated people are considered a group of individuals for whom coercion is a major concern, primarily because of the supposition that prisons are inherently coercive institutions. Incarcerated people live in conditions that restrict their social, their healthcare, their economic freedom, and even upon release, they're subject to the conditions of their parole. Therefore, I wanted to have a more dialogical approach, increasing collaboration and opening the research process for the possibility of understanding and empowerment for everyone involved. The individuals had participated in the Prison Yoga Project while incarcerated. These classes were held weekly, 75 minutes, and they participated for at least 2 years. All of the participants received an Amazon gift card as compensation for their time. The study was comprised of semi-structured interview questions detailed from the participants' experience in the classes. I wanted to understand their perceived effects of the classes while they were incarcerated, as well as the long-term effects of their participation post-incarceration. The first step in the data collection was to meet with the participants and review confidentiality as well as all other aspects of the research, obtain informed consent, and describe the procedures to the participants. This inquiry included an opportunity to examine this from a depth psychological approach, which really allows space for the body's voice. The questions highlighted the body's relationship to mindfulness-based trauma-informed practice to address the research question effectively. The integration of this study's phenomenological, anti-oppressive, and depth psychological aspects contributed to the qualitative research methodology. I had increased focus and intention concerning the empathetic attunement to the participants' presentation and my self-examination before the interviews, increasing my understanding of how the participants expressed their experiences. This introspection also helped me to be aware that there are many ways to view the relationship between mindfulness practices, empathetic attunement, kinesthetic awareness, and embodiment. As a result, I was better able to be an objective listener. I was able to be self-aware and as well informed as possible concerning the topic, both contextually and experientially. Practicing deep awareness throughout the process, I became increasingly attuned to the relationship between myself and the research topic. This exercise in researcher reflexivity served as a feedback loop about my position and how I considered my stance in the research. A review of each participant's responses revealed the uniqueness of his lived experience. I employed intuitive inquiry to support the data analysis, recognizing that quality research should reflect humanity with compassion and intimacy. One particular researcher whose work informed my process is Dr. Rosemary Anderson, who developed intuitive inquiry to invite researchers to attend to what speaks to them individually and collectively, hoping their findings will serve the greater good. Also, Dr. Johnny Saldana's research in generating meaningful qualitative data was beneficial as it outlined the philosophies between the different types of coding and the ways to transition between coding stages. I took the keywords and phrases that answered the interview questions during the coding process and then finalized themes that best supported the data. 8 men enrolled in the study, and I interviewed them via Zoom. 2 participants identified as Black or African American, 2 were Hispanic, and 4 were white. The average length of incarceration was 23 years, and the participants were released a little less than 3 years ago. The participants chose a pseudonym to protect their anonymity, which I'll use as I share quotes from the interviews. The data reflected the complex, nuanced, and challenging experiences of the participants. Each person described in vivid and precise detail their experience in the Prison Yoga Project program and the long-term effects of their participation in it. In addition to long periods of incarceration, all the participants disclosed during the interviews that they had experienced additional trauma throughout their lives, including domestic violence, abuse, neglect, incarcerated parents, and abandonment during their childhood. Their yoga practice during incarceration and post-incarceration has been transformative and contributed to an enhanced quality of life. I examine and analyze the common themes in greater detail in this next section, using specific quotes from the interviews to exemplify the themes and highlight the unique impact of this profoundly engaging somatic practice. This section will conclude with a summary of the findings. The participants described a strong bond with the facilitators as a cornerstone to their adoption and integration of the techniques taught in the class. The bond and collaboration established between the participant and the facilitator is built on trust, mutual understanding, and respect, which created a safe space for open and effective communication. Attunement refers to the process of empathetically understanding and responding to another person's emotional needs or experiences. It involves being sensitive to subtle cues and nonverbal communication, allowing for a deep connection and understanding between individuals. The alliance sets the foundation for a strong relationship, while attunement enables the facilitator to understand the participants' perspectives and experiences on a deeper level. Perhaps more importantly, it cultivated positive interpersonal dynamics and pro-social skills. Jake stated, quote, "Bringing together the heart, the mind, and body is a precious gift. And having that in that environment is truly a diamond in the rough." And I felt that and the love that the facilitators had for us. At this point in the interview, Jake paused and became visibly emotional. He said, "This experience is humbling." The knowledge imparted by the facilitators was a valuable resource that the participants shared as having a lasting impact. After 4 years of practice at San Quentin, one of the things the facilitators impressed upon us is that we can practice yoga at any time and at any place in the space with or without prompts, unquote. Another participant stated that it was the breathing techniques that was one of the most powerful tools for success in the 6 months that he's been out in society. This next section, or next theme, relates to autonomy and agency. Autonomy refers to a person's ability to make independent decisions and take actions that align with their own values, interests, and goals. It's the capacity to have self-direction and be in control of one's own life. Autonomy is closely related to personal freedom and the sense of being able to choose and act independently without undue external influence or pressure. Agency refers to an individual's sense of control and the capacity to act intentionally and purposefully in the world to shape one's own experiences and outcomes. They are both crucial for individual development, self-esteem, and psychological well-being. The depth of alliance and attunement strengthened the participants' sense of autonomy and agency, and the participants flourished even amid extreme hardship. Andre experienced a particularly challenging time after his parole date was revoked. He explained, quote, "If having that happen before I went to yoga, I would have copped out. But due to yoga, I was able to breathe. I was able to stay centered and stay focused on the prize. And what I valued was going home to be with my family." Focusing on the flourishing of incarcerated people may support them in healing their trauma, reduce recidivism rates, and support these individuals' capacity for pro-social behavior. And it may also enhance their contributions to their communities upon their release. Andre explained, quote, "Yoga taught me the emotional intelligence that I needed to sustain life out here, which is very important. You know, breathing, finding your space, basically finding your autonomy." Wade tearfully expressed, for him, quote, "The greatest gift I have received from my practice is self-acceptance, which has allowed me to heal in a way I didn't think was possible. Yoga for me is prayer, meditation, surrender, and humility. It is my connection to my eternal self and the universe," unquote. Participants also identified improved emotional regulation and impulse control due to learning and practicing mindfulness techniques. Research indicates that the ability to regulate emotions and control reactivity are essential aspects of managing the effects of trauma, including anxiety, aggression, anger, and guilt. Wade explained and described his meditation practice as, quote, being able to, no matter where I am, exhale and pause, unquote. Jack shared how his practice taught him to perceive the world more skillfully than he did before incarceration. He stated, quote, I became receptive to human kindness, softness. I started understanding that just because the person said something or looked at me wrong doesn't mean that that was aimed at me, right? And then I learned the most valuable piece of it all. Allow it to come and go from your mind, and it does, unquote. Research shows that mindfulness techniques helps individuals diagnosed with substance misuse better manage cravings by enhancing attention to thoughts and emotions. Many participants describe their struggle with sobriety and how yoga supports their journey. Wade asserted, quote, I don't know that I can hold on to my sobriety. If I stopped going to meetings and I stopped practicing yoga, I couldn't be the same person I am, right? At least not for very long. All the participants made significant statements regarding the theme of impulse control. Based on the research, a lack of awareness, emotional regulation, and negative or obsessive thoughts were common attributes of individuals diagnosed with a lack of impulse control. The participants felt that they had changed immensely due to their trauma-informed, mindfulness-based yoga practice. When Derek responded with what physical changes he experienced and noticed because of integrating his practice into his life, he offered, it definitely impacted my quality of life because it ultimately helped me heal my shoulder, which was a huge pain for me, unquote. He expressed that he had had shoulder injuries and torn rotator cuff muscles. The doctor at San Quentin, as well as his wife, had recommended that he try yoga to address the pain and diminished range of motion. He said, quote, I could barely lift my arms and was in a lot of pain. Yoga really helped out a lot with that. My favorite aspect of my yoga practice has been getting past the pain I have felt in my joints, unquote. A high percentage of incarcerated people have a history of substance abuse, chemical dependency, and misuse of prescription medications, which can make managing pain challenging. Wade experienced improved health because of his practice. He explained, quote, like most men at San Quentin, I think L4 and L5 are a real issue. And without question, and I think just about anybody who's got that issue would attest to the fact that yoga minimizes injuries. I don't nearly have as many problems with it, unquote. These findings highlight the moral imperative to provide medical care as guaranteed by the 8th Amendment in the United States Constitution. And integrative healthcare modalities such as yoga can be used to improve and maintain health during and post-incarceration for these individuals. The testimonies demonstrated that through yoga, these participants flourished even in the face of extreme adversity. Participants described how yoga empowered them to remain centered, focused, and resilient, allowing them to surmount obstacles and prioritize their well-being and family relationships. Participants portrayed yoga as a spiritual journey and as an investment in their overall well-being, allowing them to cultivate self-acceptance, emotional intelligence, which are all essential for sustaining life outside of prison. Trauma-informed mindfulness-based yoga is a promising integrative healthcare modality that can reduce the impact of trauma, including anxiety, depression, stress, and pain for people in carceral settings. It places a strong emphasis on creating an empowering environment for individuals who have experienced trauma and provides choice-making, collaboration, and support with skillful group facilitation. And lastly, can lead to durable benefits years after release, including an increased sense of agency and self-regulation. This research highlights how integrative healthcare modalities can empower individuals to tap into their innate resilience, cultivate self-awareness, and develop healthier coping mechanisms for navigating life's challenges. For incarcerated populations who are disproportionately impacted by trauma, mental health disorders, and chronic conditions, integrative healthcare offers a lifeline of hope and healing. They provide tools for managing stress, reducing anxiety, improving sleep, and enhancing overall well-being, essential skills for navigating the complexities of prison life and preparing for successful re-entry into society. Moreover, offering integrative healthcare modalities within correctional facilities is not just a matter of addressing the individual health needs. It is also a matter of promoting public health and social justice. By investing in the health and well-being of incarcerated individuals, we not only improve outcomes within prison walls, but we also contribute to healthier communities. Integrative health equity is not a lofty ideal. It is a moral imperative and pragmatic necessity. By extending the opportunity of integrative healthcare modalities to incarcerated populations, we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every human being and take a crucial step toward building a more compassionate, equitable, and resilient society for all. The studies recounted by the participants provided compelling evidence that yoga can be an effective tool for maintaining the health of incarcerated individuals and treating various ailments, empowering them to take an active role in managing their health and obtaining the physical benefits of a regular practice. By regularly practicing yoga, it gave them a sense of control and agency over their health. Their stories emphasize the importance of incorporating yoga into correctional facilities to improve incarcerated individuals' outcomes and promote well-being. The demonstrated and transformative nature of a yoga practice during incarceration and post-release has significant implication for practice and policy. For those who may not be familiar with depth psychology, it sometimes is described as a bridge over the chasm of and within the self. The work can be incredibly meaningful and rich and therapeutic in healing from trauma and psychic pain. Depth psychology proposes that the psychic process is partially conscious, partially unconscious, and partially semi-conscious. This approach recognizes the psychodynamic aspects of working with diverse populations and was exemplified when the participants spoke to this as giving them access to, quote, feelings of freedom and aliveness, unquote. The data in this study provides relevant insight for clinicians who work with individuals who fit the participant demographics of this study. It is incumbent for psychologists and other mental health care practitioners to understand how to work with and support the traumatized incarcerated body. These professionals can utilize the insights found in this study to help address their clients' social, emotional, and psychological needs. The study recognized the impact that mental health has on incarcerated people. Mental health care professionals can help advocate for services that address the unique needs of this population. Difficulties in life can be a catalyst for change and growth, and the development of the personal story can also be one of those tools to facilitate that process. With this approach, one can access the innate healing capacity within oneself to break the patterns of dysfunction. Trauma-informed criminal justice responses can help to avoid re-traumatizing individuals and can support staff as well who may suffer from vicarious trauma. This increases safety for all, decreases the chances of an individual returning to criminal behavior, and supports the recovery of justice-involved women and men with serious mental illness. Partnerships across systems can also help link individuals to trauma-informed services and treatment. This research opens a new way of viewing the incarceration system and imagining a more holistic care for this population. As stated on the previous slide, integrative healthcare equity is the right to access high-quality healthcare and services and resources for all populations. It is essential that yoga as an integrative healthcare modality is inclusive and accessible to all. The findings of this study suggest the need for a considerable increase in the research regarding the long-term effects of trauma-informed mindfulness-based practices for incarcerated populations and formerly incarcerated individuals. One recommendation is to interview incarcerated participants about their experiences and the program's long-term consequences. The research might also illuminate how yoga has aided their rehabilitation, trauma treatment, as well as how it's impacted from a transformative justice approach. Participants can describe their participation in those yoga sessions and the life changes that they have experienced through open-ended and inquisitive interviews. Another opportunity would be to conduct a quantitative study featuring the difference of means testing, which could help explore the difference in healthcare cost between incarcerated individuals with and without access to yoga programs. The study could compare healthcare expenditure data from correctional facilities with yoga programs to data from correctional facilities without such programs. The research could also analyze variables such as medical consultations, medications, emergency room visits, and hospitalizations to determine the total cost of healthcare for each group. And a final suggestion would be based on a quantitative method as well. And this is using a binary logistic regression that essentially would investigate the relationship between participation in the yoga classes and key recidivism and reintegration outcomes among formerly incarcerated individuals. The research could determine whether participation in yoga programs can deter recidivism and contribute to positive post-release outcomes. A sample of formerly incarcerated individuals, including program participants and non-participants, could be recruited for this study. Of course, in this case, it would be necessary to gather pertinent demographic information as well as data on program participation and post-release outcomes. The most important outcomes, of course, would include recidivism rates, but also looking at employment status, housing stability, and participation in community activities. So in closing, I would like to acknowledge all of my mentors, my dissertation committee, my mentors at UCSF as well, and would also like to offer in closing a prayer from a Buddhist prayer of the four immeasurables. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings rejoice in the well-being of others. May all beings live in peace, free from greed and hatred. Thank you. I appreciate your attention and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have regarding this research. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat, or if you would like, you can also come off of your, come on camera, unmute yourself, and thank you. Always grateful for the emoji applause at the end.
Thank you so much, Chanda, for that excellent talk. So I'll just second the invitation for people to turn on your video and ask a question. I was going to say in person. That's obviously whatever we call this. Or your questions also welcome in the chat.
question.
Yes.
First off, that was an incredible project and presentation. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. I'm gonna not get the language right, so I apologize in advance for that. But I was really struck by your how engaged you talked about being as the researcher in the project. I think there's a lot of stock and importance put on the idea of being impartial as a researcher. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the reflective piece of your analysis and how that played a part in your results.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, so researcher reflexivity is very important, as you all know, as researchers. And I think because this project was so near and dear to my heart, like I came to this work first before I came to like my graduate studies, for example. So I felt particularly invested. And at the same time, doing the process of a dissertation and wanting to really kind of honor the process and let the participants speak and examine what my biases may be was also like a critical and essential part of this process. So it was a very long and daunting time of like self-examination and really wanting to, honor the participants and also recognize that I'm contributing, I'm a part of this process as well. And I thought it was important to include in that, like just how much it did impact me. How could it not? So, yeah. And I felt particularly humbled by the fact that this was my dissertation project. It was something that was so incredibly intimate and I could be vulnerable with it. And so that too felt really special and precious as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question. Ariela here.
Hi, Ariela.
Hi, nice to meet you. Super. I loved your presentation. I work with post-trauma soldiers abroad, especially from Israel. And I was wondering, do you have, I enter your conversation, your Zoom, like 10 minutes after. So maybe I missed this question. Maybe you spoke about it. Is there any specific yoga that you recommend? For example, for me, works a lot the yin yoga. They love yin yoga, for example. And sometimes the style of the yoga also, we have to be very careful, right? Anything that you can point on that?
Yeah, thank you. So I didn't touch on that a lot. The yoga that we did in this practice is a hatha yoga practice. So for those who are familiar with, or maybe not familiar with yoga, there are many forms of yoga, but hatha really tends to be a balance, and we emphasize a phrase of like effortless effort. So wanting to have individuals kind of work within their range of comfort, but then to also notice sensations of discomfort in the body and then making a choice to respond appropriately. So I think, with trauma and with working with folks who've experienced trauma, their experiences have often been too much, too fast, too soon. So it's like, how can we slow all of that down? So a strong emphasis on breathing practices, or pranayama is the word in Sanskrit. So alternate nostril breathing.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a question I wanted also.
Yeah.
Is any, let's say, Kapalbhati breathing will not, do you suggest it's too strong, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's research out there that talks about, research that's been done on Ashtanga yoga, which is a very strong physical practice for folks, being very effective for folks who experience, substance abuse and addiction. So I kind of come from the mindset that individuals who've experienced like this type of both early childhood trauma as well as adult trauma while being incarcerated, it just seems intuitively, and I think the data reflects that, you want to do something that's softer and much more receptive and not necessarily always assertive in terms of like its approach.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much for that. Thank you for coming.
There are a few questions in the chat, Chanda. Do you see
Oh,
them or do you want me to read them out too?
I will go to the chat. I hadn't gone to the chat. Okay. Do you have a site? Thank you, Leanne. Do you have a site regarding this work and how yoga therapists can train and participate? No. So I participated in the prison yoga project, and so they do offer some training. I have not seen any particular training that's geared specifically to yoga therapists, but I think if you find some, please let me know because I'd love to be involved and love to participate. And if anyone has any resources, please drop them in the chat as well. I'll also say Dr. Basil Vanderkalk and David Emerson in Massachusetts, they have healing through trauma-informed yoga. And so they did a lot of like early work and they offer some online training. I have not participated in it, but it is a trauma-informed training education. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Jessica. Glad you were able to make it. Wondering if I could provide any tips or insights on navigating politics and regulations within a correctional system as a researcher. Yes. So in my original proposal, I did get institutional IRB approval, and that was very hard and very daunting. And I think if you're going to do research in a correctional facility, you really have to present it in terms of what's in it for them. Like, how will they be able to use this research? And also, if you have existing relationships and partnerships, how you're going to leverage that, because there's not a lot of support staff, and even less so since COVID, in terms of like program facilitators or community resource managers who are the liaison between the public and the institution. So I do hope to do my original proposal at some point in time, and we'll definitely look to all the relationships that I've made in terms of like helping facilitate that process. And
I want to read a question that came just to me in
Sure.
chat.
Yes.
Which is from Wendy, who says, I was wondering if all the participants had similar psychological benefits, or if different participants benefited in different ways. And if the latter, how would you either modify the program or expand teacher training to manage different needs from different participants?
That's a great question. I did not ask for folks like a detailed mental health history, so I did not ask for specific diagnoses, but just in terms of like an intake, kind of understanding their trauma history. And some folks may disclose, having issues with depression or substance misuse. And I think, yes, it would be great to offer opportunities for people kind of based on that. I know within San Quentin, for example, San Quentin is kind of like one of the model institutions in California and has shifted greatly in the last 10 years and is now emphasizing more program and more program support. And so I think in my time there, I saw and witnessed how they were creating different types of programs for folks based on similar mental health issues. So there was a yoga program that was developed and run by veterans. So veterans from the outside would come in and offer yoga for veterans with PTSD. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for that, but my research kind of wasn't that specific. If that answers your question, Wendy, but thank you. Sanal, looking for how to get trained and involved. I am a very avid yoga practitioner. That's great. I would say find a great yoga teacher training that really resonates with you and that emphasizes, an approach to yoga that honors the historical context and culture from which it comes, but also infuses and embeds a lot of trauma-informed training. And if there's a particular population that you want to work with, there's a lot of great organizations that are doing work with, recent arrivals into this country, refugees, immigrants. There's just, it's really beautiful to see how much really great quality work is coming out to support folks, regardless of like their ability to pay. So a lot of organizations are either providing these at no to low cost for participants, but still able to pay their teachers and kind of pay for the support for the programs because they're getting organizational funding or governmental funding. So I would say find a yoga, there's so many yoga schools at this point, but finding one that really resonates with you and that's aimed and aligned to the population that you want to serve. So elaborate on why I had 8 participants. Were more individuals? Yes. So the Prison Yoga Project as a program has been in, at San Quentin since 2002. And so at this point, hundreds, if not thousands of participants. There was often a wait list for participants, and the program is international. So there's classes all over the world. As a PhD dissertation student who was pivoting and wanting to graduate, I wanted to kind of contain it to, 6 to 12 participants. And so, yes, there were many more participants who participated in the program, but given the complexities of COVID and trying to complete a dissertation, I have 8 participants. Jessica. Yes, so share some more specifics about trauma-informed adaptations to yoga, especially specific to this group of people. Yes, so there are some particular considerations, just to name off a few off the top of my head, is really how you kind of set up and organize the room. So depending on what space you're in, making sure everyone has access to see the door, who's coming in, who's coming out. It's best, we would always, depending again on the layout of whatever space we were in, but trying to have everyone with their backs to the wall and facing in towards one another. So no one's feeling vulnerable that someone is behind them. It's another consideration. And then in terms of like the practice itself, there's some yoga poses or asanas that we typically don't do. Happy baby, for example, if you're familiar with that, you're lying on your back and holding your ankles with your hands. And so again, that pose can feel very vulnerable for folks. And so it's really just kind of considering the population, the location, and what is appropriate and what harms may have been experienced by this population. So just kind of always infusing that. And with Aurelia's question earlier about like breathing practices, wanting breathing practices that aren't going to be super activating for the nervous system, but calming and balancing. So some yoga practices will have breathing practices where you're breathing quite fast and hard and vigorously, and that wasn't our approach. Does that answer your question, Jessica? Those are just a few things. Thank you. And I'm sorry, Dorothy, I missed your question. Okay, no, Dorothy. Curious if there seems to be any movement in promoting or maintaining yoga therapy and similar programs at San Quentin and other carceral settings, and if these programs have been done incarcerated women and juveniles. Yes, yes, and yes to all those questions. So it's still ongoing. Yoga can be found in many jails and prisons across the US and internationally as well. And yes, there's programs in many juvenile facilities. I know there was one here in Alameda County for quite some time. And there's a juvenile facility, I think, in Stockton that also had a youth yoga program as well. Any other questions? Thanks for being so engaged, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chanda. I just want to let folks know, especially because I think not everybody who's here is probably on our um, listserv, that we have research seminars monthly, and we have 2 more this year before we take a summer break for a couple months. So the next one will be on April 23rd, and will also be regarding yoga research focused on women's health with Dr. Allison Huang, who's a very experienced DCSF researcher in that area. And so everyone is welcome, and I'm going to pull up briefly the link to how you can get emails about these if you don't already, unless someone else is faster than me to do that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyone is welcome to come off chat and ask a quick final question, applaud, etc. if you want to.
Thank you, Ariana. Thanks, Verica. Thanks, everyone.